There is a specific sound a hydraulic lift makes when it engages. It's a high-pitched mechanical whine, followed by the heavy clank of tension taking up the slack in a steel chain. Usually, when you hear that sound, it means someone parked in a fire lane, or maybe their sedan broke down on the highway. It's the sound of an inconvenience. But when you hear that sound while standing 10 feet away from your father's casket, it doesn't sound like an inconvenience. It sounds like a violation of the natural order. It sounds like a crime. I was standing on the front porch of the house my father bought 33 years ago. Inside, 50 people were speaking in hushed tones, holding paper plates of food they wouldn't eat, sharing stories about a man who had built the deck they were standing on. My mother was sitting in his favorite armchair, trying to figure out how to be a person without him for the first time since 1974. And in the driveway, a flatbed tow truck was lifting the rear axle of a Lincoln Hearse into the air. My father was inside that hearse. Standing next to the truck was a woman named Karen. She was holding a clipboard. She was tapping a pen against the metal clip. Tap, tap, tap. Checking a stopwatch on her phone. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like a neighbor. She was wearing gardening clogs and a fleece vest. She looked like someone who would wave to you while checking the mail. But as I walked down the steps, my legs feeling heavy and numb, I realized that what was happening wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. The tow truck driver looked uncomfortable. He kept glancing at the front door of the house, where a wreath of white lilies was hanging. He knew what was happening inside. He knew what was in the back of the long black car he was hooking up. But he was working, and the woman with the clipboard was the one who had called him. I walked up to her. I didn't run. I don't think I could have run if I wanted to. The grief was too heavy. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to someone else. Karen didn't look up immediately. She made a mark on her paper. Then she turned to me. Her expression was perfectly calm. It was the calm of someone who believes with every fiber of their being that rules are more important than people. "Section 4, paragraph B," she said. She didn't say hello. She didn't offer condolences. She quoted a bylaw. "Commercial vehicles are prohibited from parking in residential driveways for more than 30 minutes unless actively loading or unloading furniture. This vehicle has been stationary for 46 minutes. I stared at her. I looked at the hearse. The back window was tinted dark, but I knew exactly where the casket was positioned. "That is a hearse," I said. "My father is inside. We are having his wake." "The bylaws don't list a funeral exception," she said. She wasn't yelling. She was simply stating a fact, as if the weather was mild. "It is a commercial vehicle. It bears a company logo. It is in violation." She turned to the driver. "Lift it," she said. That moment, right there, that was the crossing point. It was the moment the world stopped making sense. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that the woman standing just inside the screen door, watching all of this unfold, wasn't just a funeral director. She was a force of nature. And she was about to bring the entire weight of the city down on this driveway. But to understand why 3 police cruisers and the mayor of the city ended up on my parents' lawn during a funeral, you have to understand who my father was. You have to understand the community he built. My dad, Jim, was a structural engineer. That's how he saw the world: stress loads, bearing walls. He saw how things fit together to keep them from falling apart. He bought the house on Elm Street in 1988. It was a fixer-upper. The first thing he did wasn't the kitchen, it was the drainage. That was Dad. He owned every tool ever manufactured, outlined in black marker on a pegboard in the garage. You needed a socket, you went to Jim. You needed a ladder, you went to Jim.
and you usually got Jim along with it. He served 2 tours in Vietnam. He never talked about it, but you could see it in the way he stood during the national anthem and in the way he valued peace. He wanted his home to be a fortress of quiet. My mom was the librarian. Between the two of them, they were the anchors, the ones who make a collection of houses feel like a neighborhood. When the HOA formed, Dad was skeptical. "I cut my grass because I have pride," he'd say. And he did. Military precision, sharpened blades, diagonal stripes. He followed the rules out of respect, not fear. He paid his dues on the first of the month. Never late, not once.
But things changed last year. A new board was elected. The old board had been neighbors, people like Dad. The new board was different. They campaigned on property values and aesthetic uniformity. Karen became the president. Karen didn't work. Her job, as far as any of us could tell, was the HOA. She patrolled the streets in her crossover SUV at 9 a.m. and 2 p.m., looking for infractions. A trash can left out 20 minutes past pickup? That's a warning letter. A basketball hoop 2 inches too close to the sidewalk? That's a fine. Dad didn't have the energy to fight her. By the time Karen took power, the pancreatic cancer had already moved into stage 4. The last 6 months were hard. The man who could lift a transmission by himself started needing help to stand up from his chair. But he never lost his dignity. He spent his final weeks on the back deck. He'd built it himself, cedar planking, reinforced steel joists. He sat out there wrapped in a blanket, watching the birds, watching the neighborhood he loved. He died on a Tuesday. He was 74. We decided to hold the viewing at the house. It wasn't about saving money. It was about honoring him. "Don't stick me in a funeral home," he told me. "Let me leave from my own front door." So we set it up. We notified the neighbors. And on Friday afternoon at 1:30 p.m., Mrs. Gable arrived. Mrs. Gable was the funeral director. She was a legend in our town. She was 60 years old, with hair that was sprayed into absolute immobility, and a suit that cost more than my first car. She commanded respect, not because she demanded it, but because she handled the worst moments of people's lives with a grace that felt supernatural. She backed the hearse into the driveway. She did it perfectly, keeping it off the grass. She left the engine idling softly so the air conditioning would run in the back. It was 90 degrees out. She wasn't going to let the interior get hot, not with Dad inside. The service was beautiful. People poured in. Neighbors who had borrowed those tools 20 years ago, former students of my mom's. They filled the living room and spilled out into the kitchen. At 2:15 p.m., the ice ran low. I volunteered to go to the garage to get a bag. I opened the door to the garage, grabbed the ice, and happened to look out the garage window that faced the driveway. That's when I saw the flashing yellow lights. I froze. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. A truck, a big flatbed wrecker from a company called Viper Towing. It had backed up to the hearse. A man in coveralls was on his knees, sliding chains under the front bumper of the black Lincoln. And there was Karen, standing at the end of the driveway, guarding the entrance like a sentry. I dropped the bag of ice. I ran through the house, dodging guests, and burst out the front door. The heat hit me first, then the sound of the diesel engine. "Hey!" I shouted. "Hey, stop!" The driver looked up, startled. He paused with the chain in his hand. Karen didn't flinch. She turned slowly. "It's a commercial vehicle," Karen said. She tapped the clipboard again. That sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was infuriating. "And it's idling. That's a noise violation and an emissions violation." "We are inside," I said, pointing to the house. "We are mourning my father. He is right there, in the car." "I know," she said. That was the worst part. She knew. She wasn't ignorant. She wasn't confused. She knew exactly what was happening, and she had decided that her authority was more important than our grief. "The bylaws are clear," she continued. "If we make an exception for you,
We have to make an exception for the plumber and the landscaper. It's about consistency. Consistency! I felt tears pricking my eyes, hot and angry. It's a hearse, Karen. It's not a plumber. It's going to be here for another hour. She shook her head. The limit is 30 minutes. It's been 46. I timed it myself. She looked at the driver. Hook it up. If he wants it released, he can pay the drop fee. The driver looked at me. Look, buddy, his voice rough. It's a $250 drop fee if I unhook it now. Otherwise, it goes to the yard. You want me to pay you? I asked, incredulously. Right now. Cash, Karen interjected, or certified check. The HOA doesn't accept personal checks. I don't have $250 cash in my pocket. I'm at a funeral. Then it gets towed, Karen said. The driver cranked the winch. The chain went taut. The front of the Lincoln rose 6 inches, then a foot. The back of the hearse tilted downward. I watched the casket inside shift slightly against the pins. I felt sick, physically sick. I was about to throw myself in front of the truck. I was about to do something that would get me arrested. But then the screen door opened behind me. It wasn't Mom. Thank God it wasn't Mom. It was Mrs. Gable.
She stepped onto the porch. She was holding a glass of water. She looked at the tow truck. She looked at the hearse, tilted awkwardly in the air. She looked at Karen. She didn't yell. She placed the glass carefully on the porch railing. She walked down the steps. Her heels clicked on the pavement. She walked right past me and stood in front of Karen. Mrs. Gable was maybe 5'4", but in that moment she looked 10 feet tall. "Ma'am," Mrs. Gable said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. "I am the funeral director in charge of these remains. You are interfering with a lawful procession." "This is private property," Karen snapped. She didn't like being challenged. "The streets are owned by the HOA. Your vehicle is in violation of our covenants." "State Statute 20-157, Mrs. Gable said. She didn't need a clipboard. She knew the law by heart. "Vehicles employed in the transport of human remains," she paused, letting the words land, "are exempt from commercial parking restrictions, exempt from idle prohibitions. You are breaking state law. Our bylaws supersede state traffic statutes on private roadways," Karen recited. She had probably said that line 100 times to people trying to park RVs or boats. She thought it was a magic spell. Mrs. Gable smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that just found blood in the water. "Is that so?" Mrs. Gable asked. "Yes," Karen said. "Now move it or pay the fee." Mrs. Gable turned to the driver. "You're Viper Towing, correct?" The driver nodded. He was sweating now. He had stopped lifting the car, but he hadn't put it down. "Yeah, Viper." "You have the city overflow contract," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," the driver said, narrowing his eyes. "How do you know that?" Mrs. Gable ignored him. She reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a cell phone. She dialed a number. She held the phone to her ear, staring directly at Karen the entire time. "David," she said into the phone, "I'm at 412 Elm, the Jim Miller service." "Yes, I know you're in a council meeting. Get out of it." "The HOA President is towing the hearse, with Jim inside." I could hear the voice on the other end of the phone, even from 3 feet away. It was a sharp, angry bark of confusion. "Yes," Mrs. Gable said, "right now. Bring the binder and bring the chief." She hung up. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. She looked at the driver. "If I were you, I wouldn't move that truck another inch. In fact, I'd strongly suggest you lower that vehicle before my husband gets here." "Who's your husband?" Karen sneered. "A lawyer? I eat lawyers for breakfast. The covenants are ironclad." Mrs. Gable didn't answer. She just checked her watch.
You have about 6 minutes." We stood there in the driveway. The sun beat down. The hearse hung in the air, suspended by cold steel chains. Neighbors had started to come out of the house now. They saw what was happening. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Is that Karen? Is she towing the hearse? Jim is inside that car." Mr. Henderson, who lived 3 doors down and walked with a cane, made his way down the stairs. "Karen!" Mr. Henderson shouted, his voice shaking with age and rage. "Have you lost your damn mind?" "Go back inside, Mr. Henderson," Karen shouted back. "This doesn't concern you. This is an enforcement action." "It concerns all of us," someone else yelled. The driver looked nervous. He was surrounded by 50 angry people. He looked at Karen. "Lady, maybe we should just drop it. This is getting hot." "No," Karen hissed. "If we back down now, they'll walk all over us. We enforce the rules, period. Do not lower that truck until I see cash." 4 minutes passed, the longest 4 minutes of my life. I stood by the hearse, my hand resting on the rear fender, just trying to apologize to my father silently for this circus. Then we heard the sirens, not the woo-woo of an ambulance, the sharp yelp-yelp of police interceptors. 2 cruisers turned the corner onto Elm Street. They weren't moving slowly. They were coming in hot. Blue lights flashing, reflecting off the windows of the suburban homes. Behind them was a black Ford Explorer with municipal plates. The doors opened. From the first cruiser, 2 uniformed officers stepped out. From the second, the chief of police himself. And from the black Explorer stepped a man in a gray suit. He was carrying a thick, black 3-ring binder. It was David Gable, the mayor. He didn't look like a politician in that moment. He looked like a man who was about to dismantle a bomb. Karen took a step back. For the first time, her confidence flickered. This is a private matter," she stammered as the mayor walked up the driveway. "You have no jurisdiction on private roads." The mayor didn't even look at her. He walked right past her, straight to the tow truck driver. The chief of police walked right behind him, his hand resting casually near his belt, his eyes scanning the scene with professional detachment. The mayor stopped at the driver's door. He held up the binder. "Viper Towing," the mayor said. His voice was low, heavy. "City contract number 44-B, issued in January of this year. Is that correct?" The driver swallowed hard. "Yes, Mr. Mayor." "I'm looking at clause 12, flipping the binder open. He didn't need to look for the page. He had it bookmarked. Performance Standards and Ethics, subsection C. Any contractor engaged in predatory practices, harassment, or the disruption of emergency or funeral services within city limits shall be subject to immediate termination of contract and forfeiture of performance bonds." The color drained from the driver's face. "That contract is worth $400,000 a year to your boss," the mayor said. "I'm going to ask you one question, and your answer will determine if your boss still has a business tomorrow morning." The mayor pointed at the hearse. "Why is that vehicle off the ground?" The driver practically fell out of the cab. "I was just following orders, Mr. Mayor. She called it in. She said it was a commercial violation. I didn't want to do it." "Unhook it, now," the mayor said. "But the drop fee," the driver started, out of habit. The chief of police stepped forward. "Son," the chief said, "if you ask for a penny, I'm arresting you for extortion. Drop the car." The driver scrambled. He yanked the lever. The hydraulics whined, a descending sound this time. The hearse hit the driveway with a heavy thud. Karen found her voice again. She rushed forward, waving her clipboard at the mayor. "You can't do that. This is HOA property. We have a signed agreement. You are interfering with the legal enforcement of—" The chief turned to her. "Ma'am, be quiet." "I will not," shrieked Karen. She was losing control. The power she had hoarded for years was evaporating in front of her. "I am the president of this association. I have the authority to—"
"Ma'am," the chief said, stepping into her personal space, "interfering with a funeral procession is a Class 2 misdemeanor in this state. Disorderly conduct is another, and attempting to solicit a cash bribe in exchange for releasing a vehicle is a felony." Karen froze. "Bribe? It's a drop fee." "You demanded cash," I said. I stepped forward. I held up my phone. I recorded it. You said, "Cash only, no personal checks," and you said it before he even finished hooking it up. The chief looked at Karen. "Is that true?" Karen looked at the mayor. She looked at Mrs. Gable, who was standing by the hearse, smoothing out the finish where the chains had touched it. She looked at the 50 neighbors standing on the lawn, staring at her with a mixture of disgust and pity. "I was just enforcing the rules," she whispered. "Your rules don't override the law," the mayor said. He closed the binder with a snap that sounded like a gunshot. "And they certainly don't override basic human decency." He turned to the driver. "Get that truck out of here. If I see Viper Towing in this neighborhood again, I'm pulling your license." The driver didn't wait. He didn't even retract the chains all the way. He jumped in the cab, threw it in reverse, and backed out of the driveway so fast he left rubber on the asphalt. The silence that followed was heavy. Karen stood alone in the driveway. The police chief was still watching her. "Ma'am," the chief said, "if you step foot on this property again today, or if you speak to this family again today, you will be leaving in the back of my car. Do you understand?" She nodded. She didn't speak. She turned around, clutching her clipboard to her chest like a shield, and walked back toward her house. She looked small. Mrs. Gable walked over to me. She put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, honey. I'm so sorry." "Thank you," I said. I was shaking. The adrenaline was crashing. The mayor walked up to Mom, who had come out to the porch during the confrontation. She was leaning against the railing, tears streaming down her face. David Gable had known my dad for 20 years. He took off his hat. "Martha," he said, "I apologize. That should never have happened." "It's okay, David," Mom said softly. Jim would have gotten a kick out of seeing Karen run off like that." We managed to laugh. It was a weak, watery laugh, but it broke the tension. The rest of the day was a blur. We took Dad to the cemetery. The police chief insisted on giving us an escort. We drove through the town with lights flashing, not stopping for a single red light. It was the send-off Dad deserved. But the story didn't end there. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, surrounded by leftover food and empty chairs. I kept hearing the sound of that chain tightening. I kept seeing the smug look on Karen's face when she demanded the cash. I pulled out my laptop. I logged into the neighborhood Facebook group. Usually the group was just people complaining about dog poop or asking for plumber recommendations. I uploaded the video. I didn't add music. I didn't add a long rant. I just wrote a caption. "The HOA president tried to tow my father's hearse during his wake today. She demanded $250 cash to stop. Here is what happened." I posted it at 11:30 p.m. By 6 a.m., it had 400 comments. By 12 noon, the local news station had called. By dinner time, there was a petition circulating. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. The agenda was supposed to be about pool maintenance and landscaping contracts. I showed up at the community center at 6:45 p.m. The meeting started at 7. I expected maybe 20 people. Usually, HOA meetings are empty. People have lives. They have jobs. But when I turned into the parking lot, there were no spaces. People were parking on the grass. I walked into the hall. It was rated for 100 people. It was standing room only. There were people spilling out into the hallway. At the front of the room sat the board, 5 people behind a folding table. Karen sat in the middle. She looked pale. She was staring at her papers, refusing to make eye contact with the sea of angry faces in front of her.
The other board members looked terrified. They realized, perhaps for the first time, that they were on the wrong side of history. I didn't sit. I stood in the back. The meeting was called to order. Karen banged her gavel. "First item on the agenda," she said, her voice wavering, "is the approval of the minutes from motion to suspend the agenda." A voice boomed from the front row. It was Mr. Henderson. He stood up, leaning heavily on his cane. "Seconded," shouted a woman from the back. "All in favor?" Mr. Henderson asked the room, ignoring the board entirely. "Aye!" The sound was deafening. It shook the acoustic tiles on the ceiling. Karen looked like she had been slapped. "You can't just hijack the meeting. We have procedures." "You hijacked a funeral, Karen," someone yelled. Mr. Henderson walked up to the microphone stand. He turned to face the room, his back to the board. "I've lived here for 40 years. Jim Miller moved in 3 years after me. When my wife died in '98, Jim came over and mowed my lawn for a month without asking. He fixed my roof after the hailstorm and wouldn't take a dime." He turned around and pointed his cane at Karen. "Last week, you fined me $50 because my trash can was visible from the street at 6 p.m. I'm 80 years old, Karen. It takes me a while to get down the driveway." A murmur of agreement went through the room. Then a young woman stood up. I recognized her. She moved in 2 years ago. "My son is autistic. He has a therapy swing in the backyard. You sent me a letter threatening to put a lien on my house. It's a medical device." One by one, they stood up. It wasn't just about the hearse anymore. The hearse was just the spark. This was an avalanche. It was years of petty tyranny, of bullying, of people being treated like subjects in a kingdom rather than neighbors in a community. Finally, Mrs. Gable stood up. The room went quiet. She walked to the microphone. She looked at Karen. "I filed a formal complaint with the State Board of Funeral Directors this morning regarding the interference with human remains. That is a state investigation. It carries civil penalties." She paused. "And my husband, the mayor, has instructed the city attorney to review the HOA's charter. It seems there are some irregularities in how fines have been collected and reported, specifically the demand for cash payments." The treasurer of the board, a man named Bob, turned white. He looked at Karen. "You told me we stopped taking cash last year." Karen didn't answer. She was trembling. "I move for a vote of no confidence to remove the president effective immediately." "Second," said Sarah, the board secretary. She was sitting right next to Karen. She pushed her chair back, distancing herself from the president. "I vote yes." "I vote yes," the treasurer said quickly. "We need a quorum of the membership," Karen stammered. "You need 60% of the homeowners to remove a director." I stepped forward from the back of the room. "Karen, look around." She looked up. She saw 85 households represented. She saw the people she had fined. She saw the people she had bullied. She saw a community that had finally had enough. "We have the quorum," I said. They took the vote. They did it by show of hands. Every single hand in the room went up. Even the other board members raised their hands. 85-0. Karen didn't say anything. She slowly packed up her binder. She put her pen in her purse. She stood up. She tried to walk out with dignity, but there was no dignity left for her. The crowd parted, but not out of respect. They parted like you part for a contagion. She walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking on the linoleum, the sound echoing in the silence. When the doors closed behind her, the room erupted. It wasn't cheering. It was a collective exhale. The tension that had gripped the neighborhood for 2 years simply vanished. We spent the next hour electing a new interim president, Sarah, the secretary, who promised to audit every fine issued in the last 24 months. I walked out of that meeting into the cool night air. The mayor was waiting in the parking lot. He wasn't in the meeting. He said it was a civil matter, but he wanted to be close by just in case. "How'd it go?" he asked. 85-0, I said. He nodded. "Good. Justice isn't always swift, but sometimes it catches up. The aftermath was swift, though. The new board voided all fines issued during the funeral. They issued a formal apology to my mother. They fired Viper Towing and hired a local company with a good reputation. Karen put her house on the market 3 weeks later. She moved to a condo complex in Florida.
I heard through the grapevine that it has a very strict board. I hope she likes it down there. I hope she enjoys being on the other side of the clipboard. But the real ending of the story isn't about Karen. It's about the deck. I went over to Mom's house yesterday. It's been 6 months since Dad passed. The grass is still green. I'm learning. Mom was sitting on the back deck with a cup of tea. The cedar planks were warm in the sun. A city truck pulled up in the driveway. It was the mayor. He wasn't there on business. He was holding a casserole dish covered in foil. He walked around the back. He tipped his hat to Mom. "Afternoon, Martha," he said. "Mary made her lasagna. She thought you might want a break from cooking." "Thank you, David," Mom said. She looked peaceful. David looked down at the deck. He ran his hand along the railing. He shook it. It didn't budge an inch. "Solid," David said. "Jim built things to last." "Yes," I said. "He sure did." We stood there for a moment, looking out at the neighborhood. We saw Mr. Henderson's roof. We saw the therapy swing in the yard 2 doors down. We saw a community that had been tested and had come together to protect its own. The hearse was gone. The tow truck was gone. The fines were gone. All that was left was the neighborhood Dad loved. And that, I realized, was the only legacy that mattered.